when relief becomes the disturbance. Consider this carefully before anything else. Most people assume discomfort is a problem to be solved as quickly as possible. When unease appears, the instinct is to escape it, correct it, or replace it with something that feels better. This habit seems reasonable. It feels humane. Yet it quietly creates the very instability it tries to remove. From a Stoic view, events themselves are neutral. Sensations arise. Thoughts appear. Circumstances change. None of this carries disturbance on its own. What turns a passing impression into suffering is the judgment that it should not be here, that it must be fixed immediately, that feeling better is a requirement rather than a preference. The moment you decide that discomfort is unacceptable, you hand authority to whatever threatens your comfort. Your attention narrows. Your judgment rushes. You begin reacting not to reality, but to your demand that reality feel different than it does. This is why trying to feel better so often backfires. The effort is aimed at sensations instead of judgments. It treats feelings as enemies instead of information. And it trains the mind to resist what it cannot fully control. Stoicism does not ask you to like discomfort. It asks you to see it accurately. When judgment stops declaring an impression as a problem, urgency dissolves. Clarity returns. Choice becomes possible again. Nothing here is about comfort. It is about responsibility. What disturbs you is not how you feel, but what you decide those feelings mean. Hold this distinction, the quiet error that wastes your effort. Before discussing discipline, ownership must be precise. Most frustration comes from a simple but persistent error, treating outcomes and feelings as if they belong to you in the same way your judgments do. You wake up tense and assume that calm is something you should be able to produce on demand. A conversation goes poorly and you assume the other person's reaction is something you failed to control. You try to feel better, and when that does not work, you conclude something has gone wrong. This is not a moral failure. It is a category mistake. What belongs to you is narrow but decisive. Your judgments. Your intentions. Your assent. The way you choose to interpret what appears in your mind. These are yours because nothing external can force them without your participation. What does not belong to you is broad and unstable. Bodily sensations. Emotional fluctuations. The reactions of others. Timing. Outcomes. Even the immediate tone of your thoughts as they first arise. These things happen. They do not ask for permission. When these two domains are confused, effort is misdirected. You spend energy trying to manage what cannot be commanded, and neglect what quietly determines everything else. Trying to feel better usually means trying to adjust a result instead of its cause. You notice discomfort and move directly to removal. You distract yourself. You reason with the feeling. You suppress it. Or you judge yourself for having it at all. Each move assumes that the sensation itself is the problem and that relief is the solution. But sensations are not decisions. They are impressions. They arise from the body, from memory, from habit. They fluctuate with sleep, hunger, weather, and countless factors outside your authority. Treating them as something you must control turns every fluctuation into a test you cannot consistently pass. Consider a simple example. You receive a short message from someone you care about. It feels cold. Immediately, tension appears. You try to feel better by rereading the message, by imagining alternative explanations, or by checking your phone repeatedly for reassurance. None of this settles the mind for long. Why? Because the real activity is not the sensation of tension. It is the judgment that the tension must be eliminated before you can proceed. Another example. You plan to work, but your mind feels scattered. Instead of beginning, you try to generate motivation or clarity first. Minutes pass. Frustration grows. The assumption is that a certain internal state must arrive before action is possible. That assumption places control where it does not belong. In both cases, the effort is sincere but misplaced. You are trying to command internal weather instead of steering by reason. Stoic discipline begins by refusing this confusion. It does not promise emotional control. It promises clarity about authority. You are not responsible for what appears. You are responsible for what you agree with. When this line is crossed, responsibility becomes vague and endless. Everything feels like your fault, and nothing feels manageable. This is why the pursuit of feeling better often increases distress. It trains the mind to monitor sensations constantly. It creates urgency around states that were meant to pass on their own. And it weakens confidence in the one capacity that actually belongs to you, judgment. The correction is not indifference. It is precision. Discomfort can be present without being a problem. Restlessness can exist without requiring immediate resolution. When you stop demanding that feelings obey you, attention returns to what you can govern. Your judgments are yours. The condition of your nervous system is not. When this boundary is respected, effort becomes effective. When it is ignored, effort multiplies without result. This explains where effort is misplaced, but not yet how disturbance takes hold, where reaction is quietly authorized. Now we look at what actually creates disturbance. Between what happens and how you respond, there is a moment that is easy to miss. An impression appears. A thought forms. A sensation registers in the body. All of this occurs automatically. None of it is yet a problem. The decisive step comes next. The mind has a habit of agreeing too quickly. It treats the first interpretation as a verdict. The impression says, "This is bad. This should not be happening," or "I cannot tolerate this," and the mind nods along without examination. That nod is assent. And once assent is given, disturbance follows as a consequence, not as an accident. This distinction matters because impressions are unavoidable. You cannot prevent a surge of anxiety, irritation, or sadness from appearing. You cannot stop a critical thought from crossing the mind. These arrive uninvited. But agreement is not forced. It is granted. Most people collapse feeling and agreement into one event. They say, "I feel anxious, therefore something is wrong," or "I feel unmotivated, therefore I cannot act." In doing so, they skip over the only point where freedom exists. They confuse a signal with a command. Consider criticism. Someone questions your work. The impression arrives instantly, heat in the chest, tightening in the jaw, a thought that says, "I am being disrespected." None of this is chosen. But the next step often is. The mind agrees that disrespect has occurred, that it must be defended against, that the feeling justifies reaction. Words follow. Tension escalates. What felt like an external attack was completed internally. Or consider delay. You are waiting for a response or a result. Time passes. The impression says, "This is taking too long." Restlessness appears. The judgment follows, "This delay is unacceptable." Now irritation feels justified. The attempt to feel better begins. You check repeatedly. You rehearse outcomes. You resist the waiting. Yet the discomfort grows because it is being reinforced by agreement. Trying to feel better at this stage often strengthens the problem. The mind treats the feeling as evidence that the judgment was correct. "If I feel this way," it reasons, "something must be wrong." This closes the loop. The sensation fuels the judgment, and the judgment intensifies the sensation. Stoic discipline interrupts this cycle at the point of assent. It does not argue with impressions. It does not demand that feelings disappear. It asks one simple question: is this judgment required? This question creates a pause. Even a brief one is enough. In that pause, you see that discomfort does not carry instructions. It presents information. It says, "Something is happening." It does not say what must be concluded. This is why efforts focused on mood management are unstable. They operate downstream. They try to adjust the outcome without addressing the agreement that produced it. As long as the mind continues to assent to every alarming interpretation, relief will always be temporary. Notice how subtle this is. The judgment often hides behind reasonable language. I just want to feel okay. I need clarity before I act. I should not feel this way. Each phrase contains an agreement that feeling better is a condition for functioning. That agreement quietly removes choice. The Stoic approach is more restrained. It allows the feeling to be present without granting it authority. It withholds assent until reason has spoken. Sometimes reason confirms the impression. Often it does not. Either way, the response becomes deliberate rather than reflexive. This is not emotional suppression. The feeling remains. The difference is that it no longer dictates behavior. The mind learns that it can experience discomfort without obeying it. Over time, this weakens the habit of automatic agreement. Freedom appears here, not at the level of sensation, but at the level of consent. The moment you stop equating feeling with truth, urgency loosens. You regain space to choose. Understanding the mechanism is not enough. It must be trained. Why effort turns into inner resistance. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. Discipline is often imagined as force applied inward. You feel something you do not want, and you try to overpower it. You push. You resist. You tighten. When that fails, you conclude that you lack discipline, and you push harder next time. This cycle quietly trains exhaustion, not mastery. Force feels active, but it is crude. It treats the mind as an enemy to be subdued rather than a faculty to be trained. And when discipline is reduced to endurance, it becomes dependent on energy, mood, and favorable conditions. When those fade, so does consistency. Stoic discipline is something else entirely. It is not pressure. It is training. Training assumes repetition, not intensity. It assumes mistakes without self-condemnation. And it works upstream, before impressions gain momentum. Trying to feel better relies on force. You notice discomfort and attempt to remove it directly. When the feeling resists, you escalate effort. This escalation creates friction. The mind interprets the resistance as failure, and tension multiplies. What began as a neutral sensation turns into a struggle. Training does not work this way. Training does not argue with the presence of discomfort. It adjusts the relationship to it. Consider how habits are formed. No one learns to walk by commanding their legs through willpower. Balance is acquired through repeated exposure to instability. Falling is part of the process. The body learns without being scolded. The same principle applies to the mind. Stoic discipline trains attention at the point of assent. Each time an impression appears and you refrain from immediately agreeing with its alarm, a pattern is reinforced. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no surge of relief. Often the discomfort remains. But something quieter occurs. The mind learns that it does not have to obey every interpretation. This is why discipline is not about feeling strong. It is about becoming familiar with the pause. At first, the pause is brief. You notice the judgment after it has already shaped your reaction. Later, you notice it as it forms. Eventually, you notice the impression before agreement hardens. This progression cannot be forced. It is earned through repetition. Many people abandon this approach because it lacks emotional reward. There is no immediate sense of victory. No sudden calm. No reassurance. But this absence is a feature, not a flaw. Discipline that depends on feeling better collapses when feeling worse arrives. Training, by contrast, is indifferent to mood. You practice withholding assent when calm and when agitated. You practice when rested and when tired. Over time, this builds reliability. Not control over feelings, but stability of judgment. It is important to be precise here. Stoic discipline does not aim to eliminate emotion. That would require constant suppression and would fail under pressure. The aim is to prevent emotion from masquerading as instruction. Feelings are allowed. Commands are examined. When discipline is mistaken for force, people either burn out or become rigid. They either give up or harden into constant resistance. Neither produces freedom. Both keep attention fixed on internal states instead of on choice. Training redirects effort. It invests energy where it compounds. Each small refusal to assent weakens the habit of automatic reaction. Each moment of restraint strengthens clarity. This accumulation is quiet, but it is durable. Discipline does not feel like winning. It feels like steadiness. And steadiness does not announce itself. Training remains abstract unless it appears in daily life, where philosophy becomes routine. This practice is proven in ordinary moments. Stoic discipline does not require special conditions. It does not wait for crises or quiet retreats. It enters through what seems insignificant, because that is where habits are formed and maintained. The first practice is anticipating impressions without anxiety. This means acknowledging, in advance, that discomfort will appear. Delays will occur. Moods will fluctuate. Other people will misunderstand you. None of this is treated as a threat. It is treated as accurate expectation. When the mind stops demanding that the day feel smooth, it is less startled when it does not. This anticipation is not pessimism. It is calibration. You are not rehearsing suffering. You are removing surprise. Surprise is what accelerates assent. When an impression arrives that you were prepared to meet, it carries less authority. The second practice is pausing before assent. This pause does not need to be dramatic. One breath is enough. Sometimes even the recognition this is an impression is sufficient. The pause creates distance between sensation and judgment. In that distance, urgency weakens. This is the moment most people skip. They feel something and immediately explain it. They justify it. They act on it. The Stoic pause interrupts this chain. It does not aim to replace the feeling with calm. It aims to prevent the feeling from becoming a verdict. You will not always catch the judgment in time. Often you will notice it after reaction has already occurred. This is still practice. The review strengthens awareness for the next encounter. Discipline is built retrospectively as much as it is built in the moment. The third practice is evening review without guilt or praise. At the end of the day, you recall where assent was granted too quickly and where it was withheld. You note this plainly. No condemnation. No congratulation. Guilt is just another unexamined judgment. Pride is another form of dependence on outcome. The purpose of review is orientation, not evaluation. You are mapping patterns. You are learning where impressions tend to bypass attention. Over time, these patterns become familiar. Familiarity reduces their power. Notice how none of these practices aim at feeling better. Calm may appear. It may not. The work proceeds regardless. This is what makes it stable. When discipline is no longer tasked with emotional regulation, it becomes reliable. Trying to feel better adds pressure to practice. It turns every difficult moment into a test of success or failure. Ordinary practice removes that pressure. It treats each moment as material, not as evidence. A crowded room, a difficult message, a restless morning, an unproductive hour, these are not interruptions. They are the training ground. When you meet them without demanding a change in sensation, attention stays available for judgment. This is how philosophy leaves abstraction. It becomes routine. It becomes quiet. It becomes something you do without needing to name it. Consistency produces a different result. What remains stable when feelings shift? Freedom is often misunderstood. Most people associate freedom with ease. They imagine it as a life where discomfort is minimal, choices feel light, and emotions cooperate. From this view, feeling better becomes proof that freedom is present. When unease returns, freedom is assumed to be lost. Stoicism rejects this equation. Inner freedom is not the absence of pressure. It is the maintenance of authority under pressure. It is the ability to experience difficulty without surrendering judgment to it. This distinction matters because life does not simplify itself to accommodate your preferences. When you stop trying to feel better as a requirement, something unexpected happens. You become less dependent on internal conditions. Action no longer waits for mood. Judgment no longer bends to sensation. The mind regains a form of sovereignty that does not fluctuate with comfort. This freedom is quiet. It does not announce itself through pleasure or relief. Often, nothing feels different at all. The body may still be tense. The mind may still be noisy. The difference is structural rather than emotional. You remain able to choose. This is why Stoic freedom can coexist with discomfort. You can feel anxious and still act reasonably. You can feel unmotivated and still begin. You can feel irritation and still speak with restraint. None of this requires suppressing emotion. It requires refusing to let emotion decide. Trying to feel better undermines this freedom by relocating authority. It teaches the mind that functioning depends on sensation. That lesson makes every mood a gatekeeper. When the gate closes, agency waits outside. Stoic discipline reverses this relationship. It treats feelings as weather, not as commands. Weather influences conditions, but it does not dictate direction. You carry on with accuracy rather than resistance. This does not make life easier. In some ways, it removes comforting illusions. You stop telling yourself that calm will arrive before responsibility begins. You stop negotiating with internal states. You accept that choice is required even when conditions are imperfect. But something essential is gained. You no longer need permission from your feelings to act well. You no longer rush to escape discomfort to restore control. Control is already where it belongs. Freedom here is not an achievement. It is maintenance. Each time you withhold assent from an urgent judgment, authority remains intact. Each time you act without waiting to feel better, freedom is exercised. Nothing outside you needs to change for this to begin. Circumstances can remain difficult. Sensations can remain unpleasant. The work continues because it is not dependent on them. This is the kind of freedom that cannot be taken. It does not rely on comfort, approval, or outcome. It rests on a single discipline repeated daily, keeping judgment under your command. Nothing more needs to be added, the obligation that ends excuses. Nothing here requires escalation. The mistake behind trying to feel better is not emotional weakness. It is the quiet refusal to accept responsibility for judgment. As long as discomfort is treated as something that must be removed before life can proceed, responsibility is delayed. And what is delayed begins to feel optional. Stoicism makes a firmer demand. It does not ask you to control what arises. It asks you to stop outsourcing authority over what you decide. This responsibility cannot be shared with circumstance, biology, history, or mood. None of those can assent on your behalf. You will not apply this perfectly. You will agree too quickly. You will react before noticing. You will still try, at times, to feel better instead of to see clearly. None of this disqualifies the practice. Error is expected. Evasion is the only failure. The work is simple, but it is not comforting. Each moment presents the same question: will you treat this impression as a command, or as something to be examined? No explanation removes this choice. No insight replaces it. Freedom does not come from success. It comes from returning, again and again, to what is yours. Judgment, assent, response. These remain available even when everything else is unstable. There is no final state where this becomes automatic and effortless. Maintenance is the discipline. Attention is the cost. This is not a flaw in the system. It is the price of sovereignty. Return to what is yours.